So yeah, this is exciting. I think there's a lot of intersections that happen when we talk about apparel and industrial design coming together. So it felt like an appropriate title for this idea of synergy. But we'll introduce ourselves first before we get into that.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I'm Gina Thurk. I graduated from UW-Stout in 2010 with a degree in apparel design and development. I did my internship with Allen Edmonds, who is a shoe manufacturing company based out of Port Washington, Wisconsin. From there, I started working at Red Wing Shoes as an associate pattern maker. And 13 years later, I am a pattern engineer, and I work with the brands who want to develop and produce in the US.
Hello, I am Sarah Noll. I graduated here as well with apparel design and development major in 2011. During college, I learned right away that I kind of wanted to be more hands-on with product and work with like small leather goods or knits, like more of a specialty focused part. And so after college, I decided to do the freelance. I did pattern engineering for various different companies. I did handbags, I did medical vests, quite a large variety, even athletic wear. And then finally landed at Red Wing Shoes in 2014, where I started on the patterning side. Moved from associate to pattern engineer, and then later transferred over to development, and I'm now a product developer for the last 3 years.
And I'm Noah Anderson. I also, as mentioned, graduated from Stout. I was in the industrial design program, graduating in 2013. I was fortunate enough to get a job with Red Wing pretty much right at the conclusion of school. But joining in 2014, same time as Sarah, just after Gina, I've worked really closely with these two from the start and on a lot of projects. So we've had a lot of really good collaboration. I didn't know that I always wanted to design shoes when I was here. I didn't know until my senior year even, like really what I wanted to do with product. I had a lot of interest. And I always tell people that I thought Stout in the industrial design program specifically did a great job providing a really wide-ranging education because there are so many products that can be designed, of course. But through the process of partaking in the program and kind of learning more about what was interesting to me, I kind of realized that footwear, which I was always excited about, was a really interesting kind of meeting point between both apparel as a soft good and then industrial design, designing for manufacture as a hard good, something I was more familiar with. And so with that opportunity that came at the end of school, that was really exciting for me. It's been a wonderful place to be at. I've stayed there my whole career so far. But yeah, I think they just have done such a good job of teaching the craft, Footwear 101. So it's exciting to be here to talk to you guys about that and share it as well. Something I don't know if everybody knows is that we have multiple brands. Like we have quite a range of brands underneath the Red Wing umbrella. A lot of times when people think of Red Wing shoes, they'll think of our heritage brand, which is that second brand you see up there. It was technically started in 2005. This was an evolution of the traditional Red Wing styling and recognizing a market that really appreciated what Red Wing does. And so heritage for the last 20 years has been fully built in the USA, and it's focused on that more lifestyle consumer. Whereas the Red Wing brand is still focused on work and making premium, durable product, and is basically our moneymaker, along with Irish Setter, which is our hunting brand, hunting and lifestyle outdoors. They also have a work division for people that wear that type of footwear, hunting footwear. We have a price point entry-level brand for younger people just getting out of school, going into the trades, looking for a more price point shoe under the Works banner, but built to the same standards that we hold all of our Red Wing product as well. A lot of people have never heard of this. Sears has a brand called Works that's like actual power tools, and so it's very confusing, and it's also not really advertised online. We mainly sell to the consumer with this brand. We also had a hiking brand. We still do. Vask was started in the 60s by the owner of the company. He was super passionate about outdoors and mountaineering, which is not something we do in Minnesota, but he would spend a lot of time doing in Italy. And if you know this brand, you may know that unfortunately it was shut down, sort of unofficially, at the end of last year. But if you're interested in hiking shoes, we're still going to sell like the top selling styles, so that'll be figured out. We also own a tannery that was actually started before Red Wing, but it is in Red Wing. It was purchased by the company in the early 1900s, and we still own it to this day. So we work really closely with a very important material supplier as we build a lot of leather product. And it's really exciting to have the tannery right in town, right across the highway from the factory in Red Wing, and also a testing lab, which we test all of our materials in to the highest standards in the industry. So it's really great to have that in town with those experts too. And then I thought I'd also include this boutique hotel that's down in Red Wing that the company owns, that is haunted, but if there are any hospitality majors, this might be an opportunity for you. Where is our product made? A lot of people know that Red Wing has always prided itself on being built in the USA, and this is still true to this day. We brief projects based on where we want them to be built, sometimes first, but it's a value and a rule at Red Wing that this is part of who we are. We will never stop making footwear in the USA, many styles, with almost the entirety of the material sourced from US suppliers. This board I put together and have used to talk to a lot of different divisions of the company, and throughout like the past few years, talking about the consumer that we recognize that cares about US made product. There is, as I mentioned earlier, a division between the heritage brand and our work brand, but the sentiment is the same between the two, and it's kind of this idea of the history, the legacy, and the loyalty. So I've mentioned that we have a lot of brand loyalists, but they expect that that product is going to be loyal to them too. So I think it's a shared value that continues to drive all of our products, whether it's under our work brands or more lifestyle. And the reason we do this is really about legacy. This is a word we talk about a lot. It's that history and tradition, and just knowing that we're fostering a brand that has existed for a long time and long before any of us. But I think our consumer recognizes this too. We have a lot of generational consumers who pass their boots down or encourage others younger than them in the trades to shop Red Wing. So we're excited about that, and we understand that legacy is a big part of the whole story. So not just our product, but the jobs that our consumers accomplish because of our product. And we do make product overseas. So these are some images I took on one of our Asia trips. It was, I think, the early 2000s when the brand, the company decided that it made sense for them to be competitive in smaller or price point markets and with technologies that simply were being outpaced in the US. And so strategically, Red Wing partnered with 2 facilities to this day that we work with that understands our products and our standards and what we expect and the consumer expects from that product. So we have great partnerships with facilities who really care about the value of what Red Wing is and seek to foster that continued legacy as well. So all 3 of us kind of come from different roles that cross over on the daily and in every project, and we talk a lot about these 3 concepts: form, fit, and function. Very similar to form follows function, but when it comes to footwear specifically, all of our roles touch this idea, and so we thought we could speak to that from each of our different perspectives.
So I will be briefly talking about how these impact me on my day-to-day responsibilities as a pattern engineer. Form starts for patterning with the last. The last is the physical form that we have to build the boot off of. Each piece that I make it has to be conformed to it precisely to give the boot structure, support, and a very defined look. Form depends on who the boot is for and how will it be used at the end of the day. Our heritage leather-lined casual boot that someone will wear just to go run errands is gonna be made differently than a Red Wing waterproof boot that has safety features that's going to actually be used out on an oil rig. Their end use completely changes my approach. It changes the way that I want to construct it and the materials that are going to be used. Now for fit, it's very important for where we put the parts, where are the seams going, what kind of materials are going to be used. Is it going to be waterproof? Is it going to be unlined? Is it going to be lined but not waterproof? All of these things are going to just change the way that it's going to fit to the form, the last, and to the consumer. I need to make sure that it still can be performed well, still can perform well and still be manufactured efficiently. I use a footwear-specific CAD system to make my base pattern. It then gets sewn and lasted by our specialists in our sample room, or our innovation hub, and they'll give me feedback on how the pattern went. We have many iterations to every kind of boot, whether it's a simple Oxford for heritage or a more complex boot like Red Wing. Now, I don't always work digitally. For a waterproof lining, I just want my material and the last. I need to drape it. I need to tailor it to the last because certain materials, depending on the vendor, have certain requirements that we must meet. I need to wrap material to go over and under that last. And with stretchy material, it is very difficult to do. But it's a fun challenge and I love it. From there, I digitize it in to then combine it with the rest of the upper components so then we can make a shoe. Once we get the model approved, we need to prepare it for production. Even though mass production is thought of initially during all of the prototype processes, I mean, we have thousands of conversations. We can do it this one time, but can we do it 100 times more, 100,000 times more? It just adds another layer of complexity for the patterning. We need to make sure that it's not only repeatable for the model size, but also for other sizes and widths that are going to go to the consumer. And my job is to ensure that those sizes can be still made cost effectively, they're still efficient to sew, and it can still keep the design intent and the functionality of it. Now, function, it's where it all comes together. The boot needs to be able to properly go on and off the foot. Components that are supporting it need to be in the proper place. And user materials and end construction methods support the demands of the job. For me, function is the final test to show, were we able to complete the designer's vision?
Okay, form from a design perspective when we talk about footwear is something that I think a lot of people here are going to be familiar with, and I've told a lot of people that I think the number one thing for me that translated from the program here at Stout to the job that I got was the design process. Like, it was almost a carbon copy. I was very comfortable going through the sketching, revision, and presenting process. I think a lot of people are excited by seeing design work, and so that's something that you guys would all understand pretty well. But this is kind of more amorphous, obviously, as a designer, working through what the product should look like. There's definitely a process of just kind of like freehand sketching like anything and coming up with ideas that might just look cool or might fit well in whatever it might be. But something I think is pretty unique to footwear, but isn't true for apparel, something I was less familiar with, was the idea of that form. So like, this is the truth. It's the same thing we go back to, and it doesn't change throughout the whole 2-year development process of a product. And so if there are changes to be made, we would go to the form to make those adjustments. but this is always going to be standardized across our roles, and that's something super helpful. Early on, I may have a shape or silhouette that's exciting, and that's really kind of the idea behind form, depending on what the trend is or what the market might be calling for. And we'd probably select an existing last based on that idea. But there are times where we might just draw something that looks right, or we feel like we need to make adjustments, and that's when we will develop a new last for a brand new form. When it comes to function, I think similarly, like we're all gonna be talking about how a shoe or boot performs, especially in like a high use environment like the product we work on. But I think it also relates to function in terms of how that fits into the visual design of an object. So this is the part where it's like I don't have to worry as much about like getting it super accurate, but I think the idea of super huge soles on shoes is something we probably all recognize. It becomes a trend, but it's kind of informed by brands like Hoka, who initially used that for performance. And so function is about how the product is going to perform, but it's also about the visual function, about how those features are called out. We don't want to be too on the nose, but we've talked a lot about, more recently, internally, the color red. What does it mean for our brand color to be red? How do we want to use it? How do we feel like we should? And so using elements like these to be cues and prompts to the consumer is really critical to selling that product as well. But all of these concepts cross over into each other. Function also includes strategically choosing materials. These are some slides from a project that didn't go forward, so I can show them to you. But normally we would dive into both the external but also the internal materials. So when we talk about the function and the fit, we're focused on what we're doing internally and if we're doing that for the right reason. So this shows a lot of materials that we chose specifically for sustainable properties or including recycled content. And then we focus on that external portion as well, performance through breathability, wicking in materials, all of these small variable aspects is going to go into it. But again, utilizing this to call out comfort and function features is really important to our product. Sometimes it looks as simple as this, so it's really all happening internally, as I mentioned, but we're building up this idea of like an overstuffed foam collar that provides a really nice user experience when you put the shoe on, and you feel it after you first see it, and I think that is a really special way to sell the function and comfort of a product. But ultimately, that's really about how those two things come together. It's a balance between the two. You know, if we're building a lightweight product, it still needs to hold up. So the consideration between those two and how the consumer relates back to it is something that I spend a lot of time thinking about as I'm choosing materials and designing the product. And ultimately, I think this just comes down to the idea of working with the nature of a material instead of against it. So being a very leather-forward company, we can do a lot of things to leather. You can fully waterproof leather, but there's obvious limitations, and I think it's really about the product being informed by the authenticity of the material, because authenticity is something that Red Wing owns and cares about for every one of our brands.
Okay, fit, form, and function from a developer standpoint. It's not just one topic, they all coincide together. So for me, that is how I have to look at it, as a collaboration between them in order to get the product to the end line. As you see on the screen, this is our form. And so a last can take many different shapes. And at the beginning of a concept, I have to also work with Noah and the pattern to really determine what is the correct form for our end use. As you can see on the top left, there's like a sneaker last. It's very flat, it's very casual, it's for your everyday wear, but you're not going to use that on a job site for like a logger boot, where you're going to be constantly on ladders and everything. You'd have a last similar almost to the high heel one, which is right across from it. And so this is where, like Noah said, we have to really look at our catalog that we have of existing lasts at Red Wing, which is roughly over 100 lasts that we use today, and determine, do we have one currently that fits what we need, Or do we need to start from scratch, work with our last suppliers, and really create what it is that we need? Then the next thing is fit. This is bigger than just the patterns at this point. We have to look at all of the materials and the layers being put into the product. How much padding are you putting in? Are you reinforcing the stitch properly? Is the consumer feeling a stitch in a place that's causing a pressure point? I have to work cross-functionally with our fit and wear team every project. Every project goes through them and they approve every step of the way. We do initial fit, 40-hour, and then we do a long-term. So long-term can vary between 1 month to 6 months, depending on what the product is. And that's where, when we get the feedback, we have to work together to figure out, is it as simple as moving a stitch or a seam out of the way to reduce the pressure point? Or do we have to go all the way back to the beginning, and is our form, our last, just not actually proper for this? So those are all kind of valid conversations we have throughout it. Then lastly, for function, for me, this is where the whole purpose of the project comes together. There's 2 things that it breaks down for me, and it's basically job site regulations and then regulatory standards. So as you see in the middle, there's a boot that has an external Met guard. That has to perform on the job site. There are companies that have safety directors that specify what has to be in your boot. And if it's an external Met guard, we want to make sure that our product is going to function and do what they need. Another one would be 8-inch with a side zip. For oil rigs, you have to be able to kick your boot off under a minute. If there's something that happens on an oil rig where a fire starts, everybody is going to jump off of it into the ocean and have to free and get as many layers off as possible. So when we're looking at this and adding features like a BOA dial or the side zip, we have to really make sure that the function, if it has to be a waterproof boot, and if the job site requirement is to quickly get it off, that they can do that in the end of the day. The last thing is the regulatory standards. We test to 3 different regulatory standards, which is ASTM, which is almost all of North America safety boots. And then CSA is for our friend up north in Canada. They have their own set of safety regulations. And then EN, that's more Europe, Middle East, and kind of the rest of the world. So when we test, we have to send them to third-party bodies, and we have to have everything test. Every component gets tested, and every safety feature has to get approved. Once the label is put on the shoe and it goes to market, then we know that Red Wing, our goal is always to exceed the expectation at any regulatory. We don't really advertise it, but any standard that they have, we don't put it to market unless it's 10% above what the safety feature is. And with footwear design, it's one of those things where you're constantly moving back and forth between 2D vision, 3D development, and then real world function. And so when we are always working together, people that are with apparel design or industrial design background is the perfect combination for people in footwear. There's not just one concept you have to look at. And it's not, if you, like Noah, he does initial design and final design. We constantly are going back and forth. So for these, we kind of all branch off of each other and collaborate and work through every product. But a lot of times when no matter where in the product line, whether we get all the way through our 2D vision to 3D prototyping and past fit and wear, we might fail something at regulatory. And then we have to use all of our knowledge that we've learned from our college and kind of try and apply that to problem solving. Is it compound? Is it materials being used? We're constantly, no matter what product we're working on, we're constantly problem solving through it, and we're okay with that. You have to have the ability to welcome change and adapt on the flow through any product lifestyle. When we were going to Stout, they did not have any footwear emphasis, and so everything that we've learned from school and then applied in work, it's crazy how much it overlaps. From patterning, for example, When we started developing patterns in school, we were in inches and we were using body measurements. At work, it's in millimeters and you're using the last form. Then for fit adjustments, we had a quality class where you literally would throw any garment on a mannequin, didn't necessarily fit it, but in the class, you then had to tell people what adjustments were needed in order to make it fit that mannequin, and then you had to do live examples. That's something we do every day. Every project, we have a panel of initial fit wear testers. They put on our product, they give us the feedback, and then we have to leave that meeting with, like, usually it's 3 to 5 people for initial try-ons, and we have to determine what part of the product is good to go and what part needs work. And it's never a straight answer. You kind of have to, someone's going to say, oh, it kind of feels a little big, but I don't know where. So then you have to lead the questions, and you have to then determine, is this a preference or is this a fit issue? Other areas with industrial design is just being really technical with the whole design and creative aspect of it. I mean, Noah goes through 3 months. He gets the concept, he does initial design, and he puts out probably like 25 designs. And then they narrow it down to probably 10 at final design, and then we have to pick the one from there. And so it's constantly working through criticism, working through real problems, and just like working together. But yeah, so that's kind of, sorry, I forgot that I have the remote. But yeah, we just kind of lean on each other, and through it all, product is always evolving. And with the luxury of having our innovation hub in Red Wing, this is something new. This is something within the last 5 years that we've developed. And we have, in the building that we work in, we get to work with Gina. We get to work with our specialists, our fit specialists. And when Noah has a new design that we're not ready to show the factories, we get to problem solve through it, and we get to work on a non-go-to-market calendar. And those are kind of one of the more cherished projects and like time that we get. But we are lucky being with Red Wing and the fact that they invested in us and made this innovation hub for us available. It's been really fun.
So, fit, form, and function. We get to deal with it every single day, cross-functionally, individually. We get to, our positions are what they are because of our experiences at Stout. And I think we've each had different experiences, but we've all fallen in love with footwear. We're not the only ones that touch footwear in our company. There are many, many other positions. A lot of these, you can also see that the apparel degree and industrial design can apply to, as well as other ones as well. But we hope that this gives a better sense of maybe how versatile your degree really can be and where it can potentially take you. So now we'll open the floor for some questions. So the question is, do we use the same size for our initial build? No, but it depends. It depends on the brand. It depends, is it men's or women's? It depends what the market is. When we first started, about 5 years before that, they started with a 10 David, a 10D, which is a normal width. But now we do everything in a 9 David. But there's been talks. Is this the right size to be using for the model? For a women's, we use a 7B. A B is a narrower width. Overseas, they get to use different sizes as well. So they pick based off of what the fit and wear team is needing for testing.
out of those 100 lasts that you said typically make up your inventory, I'm curious, are there a dozen of them that comprise 75% of your business, or is it, I'm curious about that.
Yes, we do have like core lasts that we tend to use over and over. I think domestically, we have our fan favorites, as we call them, probably 10. And then we have, it all depends on like the lifestyle or like what the brand is. So hunting requires a different base. Hiking requires a different base. So when you start breaking it down by brand and what category they're doing, then it kind of simplifies it and brings it down to, you know, like heritage, for example, women's heritage. They have 4 lasts that they go off on, all their silhouettes. Men's heritage, they've got 3 fan favorites. And then domestic works, yeah, we already said that, 10. It kind of, once you put them all together, it's very impressive. I think when we looked at it this week, it was like 188 total lasts that are active right now. And to remember those numbers, it's crazy. We have a library for that.
There's also like quite a few that we kind of know the feedback on in terms of fit. So sometimes it depends on how we feel like the product really needs to fit specifically. But I would say that there's like certain lasts that get used a lot more than others. We also list the last number, like so which last the shoe is built on our consumer-facing things, so like our website. And this is something we do with a lot of different parts of our product just to help educate the consumer. So it's a great way, like if you can figure out what last your Nike shoes are, to just make sure that you're getting like almost the same fit every time you buy a new pair of shoes.
And with that too, I'll expand. We are also trying to like update. Like over time, everybody's, like the feet anatomy is adapting too. Back when we started, I think the lasts were made on a B width for men's at the beginning of Red Wing shoes, and we're kind of evolving. Like we're at D right now, but maybe it will shift to E. Like people's feet are kind of getting flatter and wider. So then we also are updating our current library and trying to find like better fit, because some of the feedback is, you know, this shoe fits really long. So taking the guts from one form or last and kind of manipulating it to make a new updated one, we do a lot as well.
For a collaboration that might not ever be worn by a human, did you make a last for that?
Was the question for making, like collaborating to make a last not for a human?
Correct, yes.
Okay, yes. I'll let Gina kind of talk about a fun project.
Yes, there is probably the most famous plumber out there that we had the honor of making a pair of boots for. You might know him as Mario. Mario, Luigi, and Donkey Kong too. Don't make me sing Peaches. I will I'll go into it, don't worry. No, we got approached by Nintendo being like, hey, we have this Mario movie coming out. You guys are the known people for workwear. Like, can you guys make us a pair of boots? Now, my team got to work on it, and it was a blast. It was probably one of the most difficult things we've ever made, because his feet are not human. The toe is more like a clown toe, and we're trying to figure out how do you get it to go down and then up and over and then under and do all the processing. It was a challenge, but it was so much fun and such an honor to have been able to do that.
And to preface the time frame, the studio approached them in December, and they had to turn it around by March 10th. So there was not a lot of time, but they had a lot of fun creating it. They actually handmade the lasts themselves, trying, I think they used plaster and trying, and 3D printing was the winner at the end, but they did try a lot of different routes.
Connection is, I think, quite interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's super interesting to me because I've always been interested in like fashion and clothing and sewing in general and soft goods. And so that was kind of like the question when I got started. And a lot of it was spending time with them, just like looking at things in the flat. And so partly I think that a good analog is looking at like 2D CAD renders and isometric views of things. It's like very similar to reading a blueprint. So whenever we design soles, you know, we get the 2D file and we're just reading dimensions and stuff. And I feel like there are, for a design-minded person, like translatable skills there. But I think otherwise it's like, it's very similar in terms of like how you're deploying those skills. Like, I don't know if that kind of helps make sense. It's tough because when I was here, like Sarah mentioned, they didn't have a more footwear specific role. And I think it's like the combining of those two things along with like UX design and ergonomics and all of that. So I personally really appreciated that I can like use all of those different categories toward a single product. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still learning a lot about like patterning. I ask Sarah and Gina so many questions just because it's really fascinating to learn. As 3D software takes off, I think these things are going to become a lot more similar. Like there are 3D clothing, you know, softwares I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that you can essentially like use a shoe form to build a shoe in and like vice versa. So I think that's going to continue to just come like more close together thanks to places like Stout.
All right, we are actually at time right now. I'm sorry to cut you off, Dave. So let's give one more round of applause for these awesome individuals. All right, we are going to have it's going to be more of a workshop where they're going to show you and demonstrations of certain items. So for the next part, we are going to talk about